Hi, this is Andrea. Following two incredible previous seasons of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast, I'm now back with season 3. If you are listening or watching for the first time, let me tell you a bit more about myself. I'm the mother to a beautiful autistic daughter with whom I learn a whole lot every day. This has been my motivation to found and host the Neurodiverse Voices podcasts. So join me and my guests in this mission of ours to raise awareness and increase understanding of neurodivergence. Together, let's make this world one that embraces and accepts difference. Welcome to season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. The first guest of season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast is 16 years old. According to her, she has already been late diagnosed. She has been misunderstood. She has felt alienated. She has been failed by the education system. However, now that she knows that she's autistic, she's very proud of being so. And so she uses her voice to advocate for herself and other autistic girls of the same age. As part of her English GCSE, she wrote a very passionate speech that you will hear at the beginning of the episode. Please welcome Imogen Bramwell as the first guest of season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. As I'm committed to make reasonable adjustments to all my guests to meet their needs and make them as comfortable as possible during each interview, this is an audio-only episode, and I really hope you enjoy it. Hi everyone, welcome to the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. The start of this episode will be slightly different as I have Imogen with me. Imogen is 16 years old, she's autistic, and as part of her English GCSE, she has prepared a speech that we would like to share with you. Hi Imogen.
Hi.
Are you ready to start?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Another factor that makes diagnosing women much more difficult is masking. Masking is when someone hides or camouflages certain aspects of either their personality or diagnosis. Masking is a major problem as it can make individuals feel insecure and greatly exhaust them. For example, some autistic people, especially women, learn to mask from the very early stages of their life in order to fit in. They don't get to be themselves around people, and this can not only make them feel insecure of their personality, but also exhaust them as they have to maintain a false image of who they actually are. Society's understanding and acceptance of autism needs to change so that individuals don't feel as though they have to mask. The problem with the lack of diagnosis in women is that many girls grow up feeling different, feeling like an alien on the wrong planet. Uncountable numbers of undiagnosed autistic women have struggled greatly with their mental health, school, and home life. For example, I am classed as a late diagnosed autistic person. In my early teen years, I struggled greatly with my mental health and other factors of my life. The extremities of my mental health led me to going through the CAMS service, which I still am in, and even being admitted to a ward at one point. For the first couple of years at CAMS, I was treated as someone with purely just depression and anxiety. Yes, these diagnoses were correct, but I always thought that there was something else missing. It took 2 years for me to be diagnosed as autistic at the age of 14, whereas my brother was diagnosed at the small age of 3. This is a clear example of the difficulties in diagnosing women. All my life I struggled with things which were considered different, and I was sometimes seen as odd. I always felt alien. But after being diagnosed, I realised that actually I'm not alone. Other autistic people experience the same things as me, and I have nothing to be ashamed of. Now that I have a clearer understanding of me, I have learned how to cope with some of the stuff I struggled with before. This is why I believe autism diagnosing is so important, as it helps the individual understand who they are and give them clarity, yet it also makes them feel less like an imposter and learn more ways to cope with day-to-day life.
This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. Thank you so much for sharing, Imogen. That's brilliant. I know we haven't met personally, but I'm so proud of you because we can feel all the passion from there. And I had the privilege to actually read the full speech.
Thank
but we
you.
wouldn't be able to have it all in here. We will
Yeah,
think about
yeah.
how to do that at a later
Okay.
stage, but you should be really proud
Thank
of
you.
yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah. So it's been quite a struggle in school, but let's start going back to the autism itself. So
Mm.
what does autism mean to you, and how would you define it?
Autism is what defines me as me, and I think I like strongly like I really consider it a part of like my personality. And I think at first when I was diagnosed, it completely threw my life up in the air, and I was like, what is this? I don't understand. But then now I'm more educated on it. I really think it's a gift, and that obviously it does come with its struggles, but I really think it's kind of like a blessing that I was given at birth, if anything. So yeah, I would. I kind of it, although it is hard sometimes to be autistic. I do really think that it's not something to be ashamed of, and I do consider it a gift.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's great to see your acceptance and you embracing it and seeing it through a positive lens. So,
Mm.
can you share your experience with being diagnosed with autism? You mentioned you were late diagnosed, and how much of an impact that had in your life.
Yeah. So I wasn't diagnosed until 14, even though my brother is also autistic. But he was diagnosed, I think he was 3. And I think that's like already kind of proof that, we're very similar, like we're part of the same family. Yet, because he's male, he got diagnosed at a really young age and then grew up learning how to live autistic, whereas I grew up thinking I was just not normal. And then I think when I got diagnosed with autism, I was like, it changed my whole perspective on everything. So yeah, I was diagnosed quite late, um, and it came from so in my early teen years, I really struggled with mental health. So I struggled with depression, anxiety, and self harm. And so that led me to going through the CAMS service, as I mentioned in the speech.
Mhm.
And I think it still, even though I was in CAMS with like professionals and everything, it still took them 2 years to notice that I might actually be autistic. So,
Which
I
kind of
really,
shows, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt there, but it kind
no,
of
it's
shows
okay.
that the understanding within
Yeah,
the healthcare system is
exactly,
still not where it should be
exactly,
because
exactly.
diagnoses are being missed. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think initially I was really, it really changed my perspective on life, and it was really difficult to get my head around when I first got diagnosed. I remember my psychologist telling me, "I think you might be autistic," and my response was, "Don't be daft. No, I'm not." Um, and again, it took a lot of like perseverance to try and wrap my head around it. But and I think at first it was really difficult, and I was quite upset. But the more time like passed, I'm now kind of, as I said earlier, I treat it as though it's a gift now. And I think I think that's like a stage that a lot of people with late diagnosis have, where at first they feel quite shocked, upset, they don't really know what's happening, but then later they realize that it's actually a positive because you understand yourself more, and you know how to cope in the world that your brain works differently for.
Yeah. It's a whole process, isn't it? It's
Mm.
part of being in denial and then
Yeah,
understanding yourself and yeah, embracing
yeah,
it and accepting it.
yeah.
That's really good to see. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. And you mentioned in this part of your speech that sometimes you felt like an alien in on a wrong planet.
Yeah.
What can you give us an example of that, and what exactly do you mean?
Yeah. So growing up, I just always felt different from all my friends. Like even at the early stages of primary school, I remember kind of. like being in a friend group and just feeling alienated, like I wasn't normal and I didn't fit in with them. And it almost felt as though people were a different species to me because they'd feel all these massive emotions. They'd just work in a very different way to how I worked, and it actually resulted in quite even like in primary school, I'd come home upset quite a lot of the time because I just felt like I wasn't understood. I didn't fit in. I was quite often considered odd or weird. And I suppose it just, because I didn't know that I was autistic, it just felt as though I didn't belong there, or that I was like kind of socializing with a entirely different species.
Yeah, that's what needs to change. And
Yeah.
sadly, you and a lot of other young
Yeah.
people like you have gone through the same. So this
Yeah.
definitely needs to change. And that leads into my next question, actually, which is, what challenges did you face in school? I think you kind of mentioned, but in terms of the education system itself, like the curriculum, or
Yeah.
is there anything else that you would like to add that was a challenge?
Yes, so I think attendance was a big issue for me. So I think it's this thing called school refusal, where it's quite common in autistic people, where because they have to mask in a school environment because they feel as though they don't fit in or they don't belong there, they they mask to try and, like, you know, avoid getting bullied, all of that kind of stuff, and it gets exhausting. And it gets so exhausting that sometimes you just can't even get out of bed, you can't get up and brush your teeth, you can't even, nothing like that. So my attendance took a really big dip in year 8, and I struggled with attendance all throughout high school. And I was on stuff like a part-time timetable. I took long periods of time off school quite simply because I just couldn't face going into an environment that made me feel not normal and not welcome. And I always felt trapped because the attendance officers and the pastoral team at my school didn't understand my needs at all, and they didn't even try to understand. So attendance was a big issue for me because I even had medical letters, like, from my psychiatrist and psychologist saying Imogen can't attend school because she's really ill, like mentally, and my school was saying that's not an excuse, you need to come into school. For example, they threatened to take my parents to court because my attendance was below what they expected, even though we had medical evidence. And I remember my mum saying, what difference is it to, say, a chronically ill, like, person, like with cancer or something, they have to spend time off school because they're genuinely ill. What difference does it make that it's a mental, like, difficulty, not a physical difficulty? And we had so many meetings throughout all of high school where it's the same things being repeated over and over again. Like, it's not an excuse, you need to come into school, all of that stuff. So I think the fact that they put so much pressure on me to attend school, I think that actually did more damage than good, because the more pressure they put on, the less likely I wanted to go in. Because when I would go in, and for example, if I'd go in for the morning and then towards the afternoon I'd start feeling really anxious or start having a panic attack, they wouldn't let me go home because they knew my attendance wasn't good enough, so they would keep me in school. And I suppose that made me feel really trapped. So that just made me not want to go into school at all, because I felt like I remember, like, in the mornings I'd say to my mum, I can't do school today, and she'd say, why don't you go in for 1 or 2 lessons and I'll come pick you up? But I'd say, you don't understand, they won't let me do that. Once I'm in there until the end of the day, and I'm trapped in there. So I think that was that really made my school life hell. The amount of pressure they put on me for attendance and also the rest of my family, because I saw the impacts it had on my family as well. And I just I just find it crazy that we had medical evidence saying Imogen can't be in school, and they still were like, no, you have to come into school, all of that kind of stuff, and even taking it as far as saying that they're going to take my parents to court. And it took a lot of fighting and a lot of pushing to even get a part-time timetable. And even when I was on that, they were still they weren't very inclusive, and it felt as though they were almost saying autism isn't real. Like, it's not a real problem. You need to just get into school. It's all inside your head. I remember one of the pastoral staff basically telling me to suck it up one day. And, it was just... So I do think attendance and like the attitudes around attendance, especially for people with autism or even just any mental health like difficulty, the 97% attendance rule, it shouldn't apply to absolutely everyone. They should make reasonable adjustments for people, because like my mum made an analogy saying it's like asking someone with a broken leg to walk up a hill. Like, it's just, they can't do it. So for lots of autistic people, it's not how their brain works, and they genuinely can't do it. So I really do think attendance was one of the biggest issues I faced. And part of that was also the pastoral team and the kind of like the teachers that they wouldn't even try to help. So I really struggled with communicating with other teachers. So they would always say, I'm always here, come talk to me if there's anything wrong. Yet whenever I did go and tell them something was wrong, they would either shout at me, tell me I'm being dramatic, or just tell me to go back to class. One specific thing I remembered was actually I'd relapsed in school, and I'd gone to my pastoral manager and said, I really need to go home. I can't be in here right now. Like, I'm feeling awful, and please can I call my mum? And she told me that I was being dramatic and that I needed to go back to class. And I think that it really, from that day, I just realised I'm on my own in here. I can't. The teachers say they're there to help, but I'm fighting my own battles in here. Like, and I think the fact that I felt so alone and that I couldn't go and talk to people, that also really didn't help with the attendance, because it was like a war zone. I was fighting all the other stuff, and then also I couldn't talk to anyone about it. And I just think the pastoral team, I would never wish that upon anyone, to have to go through that ever again, because I think, diagnosis or not, if there's a student struggling in front of you, you should give them help. Doesn't matter if they're diagnosed with something or if they're not diagnosed. If there's a child clearly struggling in front of you, refusing to help them is just absolutely... I just find it disgusting, really. And
yeah, I'm speechless. I'm speechless.
I know.
And it almost feels like humane.
Yeah,
and you have
it's
another human being kind of asking for help, and you were actually communicating with them that you were struggling, and no one was listening to you. You weren't being heard, and the impact that had on your mental health, that's the other thing. It feels like physical health is still more important than mental health. It still continues being very much underrated, and that should not be the case. So let's hope that this changes. I know from previous guests that I interviewed as well that it's still happening. There's some petitions even going around for attendance, because you are being charged and you are being applied fines if children don't go to school. But again, we cannot have a system that focuses only on the majority, because we need to look at it will be a minority, but
The
we
minority still counts.
exactly, and we are all human beings, and we all have
Yes.
rights, and
Yes.
definitely not being looked after as we should.
I remember actually, this same pastoral manager, I'd asked her, please, can I go home? I need to go home. Because I was like in tears, having a panic attack, hyperventilating. And she said, no, go back to class. And she sent me to class. But I just called my mum because I just said to her, I can't do this. You need to come pick me up. And I remember when my mum came to pick me up, the pastoral manager escorted me out of like the school. And she even said to my mum, I don't know what she's so upset about. She's just being a bit dramatic. And I remember my mum actually kind of looking at her like, what? And it was just, I just find it so crazy that they didn't even try to understand. Like, it's not as though they were like slightly uneducated and were trying to understand. They just didn't even care. And I remember telling her I'm going for an autism test, and she said to me, like, don't be stupid, you're not autistic. And I was just like, what do you mean? And I remember going back and telling her, actually, I am autistic, and kind of seeing the look on her face, and I was like, yeah, that's what I thought. And I think as well, I struggled a lot with bullying as well, particularly so I moved school partway through year 9, but at my initial school, I struggled with bullying a lot, and that was before I was diagnosed. I think, again, because I was perceived as quite odd. I didn't go to school that much because I just couldn't cope with like the sensory side of it. So I would get quite a lot of bullying. I'd have people shouting mean names at me in the corridors. People I didn't know like saying stuff to me. It was just a horrible experience. And I remember just saying to my mum one day, I can't even walk across a classroom without having something shouted at me. So I think the bullying aspect of things as well, really, that was a massive issue I struggled with in school, because it really lowered my self-esteem to the point where I genuinely just despised myself. Like, I'd started letting their voices get into my head, and I'd
Because then
started
you start
yeah,
believing what you
yeah,
are told.
yeah.
And that's not right. I'm so sorry to hear that you've been through all of this.
Thank you.
And I wish I could, I had like I don't know, some magic power. We will talk about
Yeah,
superpowers later. That's I could
yeah.
change that. But you are incredibly brave, and you should be very
Thank
proud
you.
of
Thank
yourself.
you.
This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast.
Thank you.
So when we first met, you mentioned you are now at college,
Yes.
and what I'm interested to know now is, after the diagnosis, what has changed? Because you seem to be enjoying college a lot more
Yeah.
than you did with school, right?
Yes, a lot. So I think kind of straight after the diagnosis, I did get moved over to the learning support facility instead of like the pastoral team. And that really helped because they understood a lot more, because, the pastoral team weren't educated on autism as well as they were. And I still think that the pastoral team should have been educated on autism and still should not have treated me or anyone else like that.
Yep.
But I think being moved over to the learning support faculty, it really did help a lot, because I felt more heard, I felt more seen, and I just felt more welcome. So that did help. I mean, I still had issues with the school all the way up until GCSEs, but that it did help a bit. But I think the main thing with college is that now that I have been diagnosed autistic, I really understand how to regulate myself, and I've learned now that I need breaks and I need like time just to myself, like quiet time, if anything, so that I can just sit alone with my thoughts and regulate myself. Whereas in high school, it was from 9 o'clock till 3 o'clock every single day in the same busy, loud, bright environment with like bustly corridors, quite often people who were nasty to me, teachers that didn't care or understand, and there was just no break whatsoever. Whereas with college, quite often I'll have a lesson and then have a 1 or 2 hour break afterwards before I have my next lesson. And I find that so helpful because it gives me time to process what had happened in the lesson prior and give me time to prepare myself for the next lesson instead of going from one lesson straight to another one. So I find that so much more manageable and helpful, and I think that's a big thing to why I much can't speak to why I enjoy college so much more than high school. And I think as well, the sensory side of things is a lot easier. Like, we're not wearing uniform. The classrooms are a lot more. It's a lot less structured, which I know sounds a bit funny because I think there's a stereotype that autistic people like structure, but actually it's so much more freeing, and they treat you like a young adult, not a child. And it really, really helps because it doesn't feel like you're going into a prison. If anything, it feels like
Yeah.
you're actually going into somewhere where people care and people are going to learn. And I think as well, because the other students have grown up a lot and like matured, there's nowhere near as much kind of petty name calling, arguments, bullying, that kind of stuff. And it just feels as a much overall just a more inclusive environment. And the teachers there as well seem to be a lot more inclusive. And I've already had, lots of meetings with the learning support facility at my college, and they are great as well. And I just enjoy it so much more because I'm studying the subjects I'm actually interested in.
Yeah.
The sensory side isn't as difficult, and it just feels so much more homely and like inclusive.
Yeah, it's really good to hear. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. And in terms of masking, which was mentioned in your speech as well, and it's very common in women and autistic girls.
Yeah.
Do you feel a change in college as well when compared to school? Do you feel like you mask less now? That you can
Yes,
be more yourself?
yes, I really, really do. So I think at school, I kind of forced myself to be friends with. I forced myself to be someone I'm not, just to get the bare minimum of like friendship. Whereas now I've learned that people will actually like me for who I am, and I don't have to mask. And I've found my people who like me for who I am, and I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not with them. And it just makes my life so much easier because I'm not exhausted from masking all the time. And I'm not as insecure because I feel like people actually enjoy my company, but they're not enjoying a different Imogen's company. They're enjoying the actual Imogen's company. So I do think, I don't necessarily know if it's college that's changed this, but I think as the years have gone by after I've been diagnosed, I've learned more about myself and learned that I just need to, instead of trying to get as many friends as possible and fit in as much, all that matters is getting a tight circle of close friends that understand you and care about you. So I really do think that, like, without them, I would not be in the same place that I'm in today.
It's that confident boost that you get, because then you can just be yourself, and people like you for who you are, and then it's a bit of a circle, isn't it? The the more you realize that people like you for who you are, the more confident you become.
Yeah.
And then mixed with understanding yourself and that learning journey about yourself altogether, it helps. And what is the most positive, or what are the most positive aspects of being autistic within yourself?
I love the way the way my brain works, and a lot of other autistic people's brains works, with how kind of enthusiastic they are about special interests. So with my special interests, I genuinely just don't shut up about them at all. And I think the more I've kind of got involved in autistic communities, the more I see it in other autistic people. And I love seeing how passionate people can get over whatever like area they're interested in. And I do think that it's actually a gift, because a neurotypical person wouldn't be able to spend, well, probably wouldn't be able to spend hours upon hours of their free time researching and studying something. Whereas if it's an autistic person's special interest, they can completely focus everything on it, and it can really make them really, really clever, I find. And I just, I also love the way our brain works in terms of our like wit and like humor, because when I was masking, I was quite quiet. I didn't really speak up much. Whereas now I'm actually being myself. People actually, I have quite a lot of the time, people say, "Oh, you're actually really funny," like, And so I used to not talk about how I'm autistic, whereas now I'm quite open about it. And um, I remember someone saying to me, um, I would never have guessed you're autistic because you're so like loud and funny, and I was like, right, okay. But yeah, I do.
Part of the misconceptions that there are,
Yes,
right? Yep.
yes. But I like how different our brains are, and it does come with its challenges, but I'd much rather be different than a clone of everyone else in the whole world.
Yep. Can I be a bit curious and ask you what are your special interests at the
Yes, of
moment?
course.
Because they can change, right?
Yes, they
So
change. So I think a special interest that has always been there is the Hunger Games. It's a bit
okay,
random, but I've always been a huge fan of the Hunger Games. I know everything about it. I've watched them and read them hundreds of times. I've got posters up in my room of it. I've got like figures. I've got like signed, like I've got a signed poster from the actor of Katniss Everdeen. Um,
amazing.
and I think that's always been one of my like kind of obsessions ever since I was ever since I was like 10. And I've always had special interests in terms of like fiction. So before I read The Hunger Games, it was Harry Potter, absolutely obsessed with it. But then it kind of switched to The Hunger Games as I got older, and I know so much about it. And I suppose sometimes special interests like that, they don't really have like that much of like use in terms of like it's not making me smarter or anything, but it's just so fun being part of a community, knowing so much about it, everything like that. And I rarely cry in terms of watching or reading books. The only book I've ever cried at has been The Hunger Games, and it wasn't because it was, well, it is sad, but it wasn't because it was sad. I cried when I finished the last book, and I just cried for hours because I was so sad that I'd finished it.
Yes, it was
Um,
the end.
yes, and so I think so. The Hunger Games is a big one. Another big one for me is music. So I'm a singer, and I am obsessed with like musical theatre. So I do productions. I watch them all the time. I go to singing lessons. I think music has just always been one of my like it just makes me me. And I think a lot of people like, when I used to I met this person once and I said, "Oh, right, so what kind of music do you listen to?" And they said, "I don't listen to music." And I was like, "What?"
I know,
Like I
right?
just genuinely can't
I don't
imagine life
understand.
without music. And I've always been really interested in instruments. So I can play piano, I can sing, I can drum, I can play the flute. I've always been very musical. Um, so I think that's a big thing as well. So yeah, music is a very, very big part of my life. And then I think I also get kind of small spurts of special interest. So I have like my long term ones like music and the Hunger Games, but I get small spurts of them. So at the moment it's like ancient mythology, like Greek or Roman mythology. And I remember telling one of my new college friends, they were like, "Oh, what did you do last night?" And I said, "I watched a 3 hour YouTube video on ancient Greek mythology and took notes on it." And she was looking at me like, "What?" And I was just because I do genuinely just kind of, when I get a special interest, I devote all my time to it. And literally the other day, I spent about 3 hours taking notes on Greek mythology.
Yep.
And I think it's just crazy, I think, sometimes. Um,
It's a
oh
good kind
yes,
of crazy.
yes, good kind of crazy. And another, I think my kind of last big special interest would be gaming. I'm a big gamer.
Hmm.
Um, I especially love horror games and like story games. So I think my favorite game would probably be. Oh, actually, that's a hard question. I don't know what my favorite game would be, but yeah, I'm a big gamer, and I do spend probably a third of my life locked up in my bedroom on my PC. So yeah, but those are my special interests, I'd say.
Yeah.
So
And they help you so much, isn't it?
yeah, they
And
do.
when you're hyper focused and you just yeah, but they make you happy. So
Yeah,
they might
yeah,
make you cry like the Hunger
yeah,
Games final book. But
yeah,
mostly they make you happy, so that's
yes,
good.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
And we actually have one of them in common, music, and I love
yeah,
singing. I'm not singing for a long time now, but yeah,
yeah,
I think we can talk about that later
yes, yeah. I
because I'm
think
quite interested
yeah, the
to hear
biggest way
more.
I blow off steam, my dad always says this, the biggest way I blow off steam is by singing. And he
Yeah.
says, he always jokes and says, you can never get a quiet day in my house because I'm constantly just singing my heart out. But yeah, singing really does. It's it it's one of my
It's
main coping
therapy.
strategies. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
therapy for sure. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast.
yeah.
Um, in terms of autism in girls, why do you think more understanding and better understanding is needed? Why is it important? And I guess I know the answer because you have the lived experience of that. But
Mm.
what would you say?
So I'd say the stereotypes around autism in girls is just so harmful and inaccurate. And because, for example, even I was susceptible to this when I got like first presented with the idea that I might be autistic. I was thinking, don't be stupid. I'm not kind of non-verbal. I'm not like the extreme cases at all. And I think quite often, because in school, quite often people would use autism as like an insult. They'd be like, "Oh, you're so autistic," and I just think the stereotypes around it are just so
Wrong.
harmful to young people, and they're so inaccurate, and um, it made it really difficult accepting that I was autistic because at first I was like, oh my gosh, I'm one of those weird people kind of thing, and it's just not true at all. And honestly, if I could talk to me back then, I'd say being autistic isn't weird. That's just what an awful society has taught you to think.
That's it.
So I really do think that more awareness needs to be spread about autism, particularly in girls, but also in men as well, because there are some common misconceptions with autism in men. So I think just overall, the stereotypes are just so harmful and really inaccurate. And I think as well, the kind of specifically in women, the kind of lack of diagnosis and lack of understanding, like even in the healthcare system, like the even now the autism assessment is still entirely aimed at men, and I just still think it's a bit crazy, and I think it's just, and because being undiagnosed and growing up undiagnosed can be so difficult and so harmful. And if I could change one thing about my life, it probably would be to get diagnosed earlier, because being diagnosed at an early stage means you can learn how your brain works and you can learn to cope. Whereas if you don't know what's actually going on inside your head, how on earth are you gonna learn how to cope? Because I spent all the years when I didn't know I had autism, thinking, why does none of this therapy work? Why does none of these techniques work? Am I just broken? Something like that. But then when I got diagnosed with autistic, I learned how to like cope with my brain, how to cope in like a society like this. And I just think being undiagnosed is kind of like the worst thing anyone could ever go through, because I really just do think that I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but I feel so strongly on the fact that there needs to be more inclusive ways of testing that include women, and I just think women need to be. I think autism in women needs to be more kind of verbalized and normalized, because just the lack of diagnosis makes it so difficult on a woman with autism. So
Yeah. And also, in terms of late diagnosis as well, I was listening to a podcast yesterday and I heard that if you are an adult and you're being assessed, for example, there is a question in the test that it's about, do you are you obsessed with, or I don't remember the exact words, but it's about lining up trains
yes,
and
that's exactly what I was
airplanes.
going to
And
say.
so besides predominantly being designed for male, it's also designed
Designed for
for
children.
children. But what about the adults who actually are,
Yeah,
or the young
yeah,
people who are diagnosed
exactly.
at a
Well,
later
yeah,
stage?
because I went through the test at 14, and um, I remember going into it, and they asked me to kind of tell them how I brush my teeth. They asked me to read this. It was like this. I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it was like this frog book, and it was a book with absolutely no words in, and it was about flying frogs. And I remember them. It's like a picture book aimed at probably 5 or 6 year olds, and I remember them giving me it and saying, "Tell a story with this." And I was sat there like 14. I'd just picked my GCSEs, kind of thinking, "What on earth are you getting me to do here?" And it was almost patronising, because I was like, I'm not a child, and I do think new ways of assessing and testing for autism needs to come about, because I think there needs to be ones more aimed at girls, and I think there needs to be ones more aimed at kind of adults as well.
And it's good to see that there's some academic research as well, and being done by clinicians trying to change that. And
Yeah,
yeah, the lived experience aspect should
yeah,
definitely be accounted when these kind of tests are designed. We cannot design them just based on a medical model of people who don't have the lived experience. So that should change, for sure. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. Going back to school, what ideas would you suggest, or how would you say that the education systems should change, or things that schools should implement to better support autistic and neurodivergent children and young people?
yeah. I think there should be better attitudes towards attendance, because it was such an impact. And I think the attitudes towards attendance, if anything, made my attendance even worse. And I think if they were more supportive of me not being able to attend school, I probably would have actually been able to go in more. And then that's actually affected my learning, their kind of lack of understanding of, my needs. I think that really affected my learning, and I've missed out there. And that's not fair. And I don't want anyone else to go through that. So I do think a better attitude towards attendance really, really needs to be kind of put in place. And I think I mentioned this earlier. I think it's offering help to anyone, diagnosis or not. It shouldn't matter, because I was always denied help before I got diagnosed with autism, and they thought I was being dramatic. They thought I was being, over the top. I just was trying to get out of lesson, stuff like that, and it really wasn't that at all. And I just think it shouldn't have mattered that it shouldn't have mattered that I had a diagnosis or not. If I was struggling, they should have helped me. And I think they should do that to if there's a child in front of you struggling, because I remember like countless times where I was crying my eyes out, having a panic attack in front of the pastoral lead, and them just telling me to go back to class. And I just think, diagnosis or not, you shouldn't. That's just inhumane. You shouldn't do that to anyone. And I think you don't. you shouldn't have to have a because some people don't have the resources to get diagnosed. Like, there's such a long waiting list, and some people can't afford to kind of get it privately diagnosed. So I think you should just be given help, diagnosis or not. And I also think the final thing that I'd change is kind of the sensory side of stuff. So I think they need to be more inclusive of autistic people's needs in terms of like the classrooms are very cramped. Well, this was for my school. The classrooms were very cramped. There were very bright, kind of harsh lights. It was very, very loud and noisy. And I know there's only so much things that a school can put in place. But for example, if they said instead of getting everyone out of classes in the corridors at the same time, they kind of staggered the leaving class so that, say, only 1 or 2 classes would be on the corridors at one moment of time to prevent it being overcrowded and too loud. I think maybe possibly a sensory room for autistic people to go if they're feeling overwhelmed, where it's just nice and quiet. And my mum quite often says I'm kind of like a troglodyte because in my room I like the curtains being shut and it just being quiet and dark, almost like a cave. And I think, but honestly, like a room like that in school, if I was having a bad day and I was getting really overwhelmed, if I just had a place to go like that, it probably would have done so much help to me.
It would have made a difference. And I think we all see that these small changes are very, very simple to accommodate. We don't need a lot of funding. We don't need, it's nothing special. It's that simple. There are simple things that can be done and adjusted. Yeah, thank you for sharing those ideas. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. Going back to your mental health. So how has your experience with mental health influenced your understanding of autism?
So at first, because I was diagnosed with mental health problems before autism, I thought that it made me feel like autism caused my mental health problems, and it made me kind of have a bit of a negative view on autism, kind of thinking, oh, I was kind of cursed and they've given me these like difficulties. But I think, again, the more time passed and the more research I did on autism, it made me realize actually it wasn't the autism that gave me the mental health problems. It was the society I was raised in that gave me. It was the society that I was raised in that wasn't fit for an autistic person. If it was, I think if I was raised in if I was raised in a society perfect for autistic people, I don't think I would have had the same difficulties I did have. So I think that's a big thing that I really like. It changed my view on a lot of stuff, because at first I really, really hated the fact that I was autistic and thought it's given me all these problems with my mental health. But then it took a while for me to realize actually, no, it wasn't the autism that gave me the mental health problems. It was the lack of help I was given and the way our society works with people who are autistic. And I do kind of, I'm proud that I'm autistic, and I do consider it, as I said, a gift. But don't get me wrong, there are days when it is hard, and sometimes there are times when it's hard, and I think, why can't I be the same as everyone else? Why do I have to be different? But I think the main thing is when you feel those days and you just feel a bit bad about yourself, I think the thing is just kind of getting up and getting past that, because realistically, autism really is, it does come with its issues, but it's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. So I think that really, yeah.
And it's about being kind to yourself as well, and thinking that, maybe on that day you only have 20% to give, but those 20% will be your 100%.
Exactly.
So I think we often forget to be kind to ourselves and compassionate, and think, no, I can do this, and I'm doing my best. And that's the way to go about it.
Yeah, I want people to know that having days like that's normal. I'm not like, it's not expected that you get diagnosed as autistic and then every day is going to be absolutely perfect for the rest of your life. It's not like that at all, even though I wish it was, but it's not like that at all. And I think just for a while I found those days really difficult, but I've learned now to accept that those days are going to come, and accept to myself that it's okay for me to feel like that, and I shouldn't be upset or ashamed of myself for feeling like that, and it's normal.
Yeah, and it just reminded me. So one of my little girl's obsessions at the moment, well, it's been for a while. It's not just at the moment. Is Inside Out, the movie. Have you watched it?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's clear in there that we need all of our emotions. We need anxiety to survive. We need sadness to be happy as well. So we cannot be happy all the time. We cannot be sad all the time. It's about learning how to deal with our emotions and how to support ourselves and have the support of others around us. Yeah. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast.
Yeah.
So when we had the first chat as well, you mentioned Autistic Girls Network
Yes.
as a positive development. So how has Autistic Girls Network as a community helped you and others?
Yeah. So it was my mum that introduced me to it. And I think, so again, when I was first diagnosed, I felt so alone. I felt like, oh my God, I've been kind of cursed at birth to be different to everyone else. And I remember like the first few weeks or months after being diagnosed were really difficult, and I just felt like I didn't belong. But then when my mum showed me Autistic Girls Network, it really just kind of flipped a switch in my brain, and I realised actually I'm not alone. There are other people going through exactly the same stuff as me, and just because society doesn't want us to see that, there are people that you're not alone, and there are people going through the same difficulties as you. And even if it's like, there are communities out there, like even if you're like kind of a boy struggling with late diagnosis or something like that, there are communities out there for that too. Like it's not just like, late diagnosis in women. It just kind of, whatever kind of thing you struggle with, you're not alone with that. You're not going to be the first person in the world to struggle with something like that. And I think a big thing that helped me was seeing the kind of, as well as Autistic Girls Network, kind of seeing examples of people who had very similar situations to me. For example, my mum's friend's daughter was very similar to me, was in and out of hospital quite a lot, and was diagnosed quite late as autistic, didn't go to school much, that kind of stuff. But then now she's so successful. She's at university. She's got so many friends. She's happy in life. And I think seeing examples of people who've gone through the same thing as me, who have turned out great and have turned out happy, it gave me a lot of hope for the future, and it made me feel less kind of desperate and alone.
I relate to that as well as a parent, and listening to you, for example, at the age of 16, being so open about your autism and about your journey. I also think about my daughter, for example, when she gets to your age, and I really hope she had an early diagnosis. It's a different journey. It will be her unique journey, but I really hope that she gets to your age with the same with the same approach and the same attitude to life. So it's very important to be connected with the community.
I do think that at first, it was really difficult, and I was kind of ashamed of my autism, and I didn't tell people for years. And it's only actually been the last couple of months really that I've started being more open about it, because I've accepted that actually it's okay to be different. It's okay to be autistic. I know that sometimes you don't want to be, but it has so many like positives about it. And I kind of thought to myself, instead of sitting here and wallowing in my sorrows about why can't I be normal, why can't I be neurotypical, I thought I want to campaign for other autistic girls so that they don't have to, well, not just autistic girls, just any autistic people, so that they don't have to go through the stuff that I went through, I just thought, I'm not going to stay silent about it. And I think, like, don't get me wrong, it was really hard getting diagnosed. And there are still days, as I said, where it's difficult being autistic. But the last couple of months where I've been more open about it and I've started doing stuff to try and help other autistic people, it's made me feel so much better about myself, because I feel like I don't have to hide away from like the world, and I can just be me. So
Doesn't it give you like a sense of freedom?
yes, exactly that. Yeah.
Right. And what advice would you give to young people who might be struggling with school and with their autism diagnosis?
Um, I just say give yourself a big hug. Um, quite a lot of the time, people always say just get up, keep going, keep moving on with life, but I don't think that necessarily always works for all autistic people. What really helped me was just kind of taking the time to look after yourself and take care of yourself, and notice that actually it's okay to struggle, and just be proud of yourself for even literally the smallest things, like getting out of bed in the morning, brushing your hair, stuff like that. So, and it's okay to feel strange, especially if you're just being diagnosed or if you've always been diagnosed. It's okay to feel strange, because the society we live in wasn't made for autistic people, and that's hard to accept, but it's okay to feel strange about it. I remember quite often people, when I would open up and say, oh, I feel like it's unfair that I'm autistic and other people aren't, people would always kind of say, oh, don't feel like that, it's okay, like, just get on with life, that kind of stuff. But actually what helped me was noticing that and actually thinking, no, it's okay to feel like that. And I just think, if I could do anything to, for example, my younger self before I got diagnosed, anything like that, I'd just give her a hug and just say, it's going to be okay. In a few years' time, you're going to be happy. There's not, and you don't. Sorry, my brain's a bit scrambled. Um, I would just give her a hug and say, it's okay. In a few years' time, you'll be happy, and life will be so much better than it is now. And I think I'd just say that to any person going through any kind of difficulty, and just think, it might feel like you're in the deepest, darkest pit right now, but I can promise that it gets better. And I think things that help with, helping to get better is socializing with other people who are autistic. So I think that helped me a lot. Again, as I said, like the Autistic Girls Network. At first I felt very alone, very kind of, oh, what is this thing? I don't understand much about it. But the more I kind of did research on it, and I think a lot of it was help from my mum, because my mum did a lot of research and she would send me stuff. Like, yeah. So socializing with other autistic people, like my mum's friend's daughter, socializing with other autistic people online, stuff like that, that really helped, because it helped me understand more about myself, and it helped me feel less alone and know that other people were going through the same situation as me.
Thank you. That's very, very kind. In terms of society, because in part, the way that you felt has to do with society, and we talked about this. Can you give me one example of a change in attitude that you would like to see in the next few years?
Yeah, I'd say the stereotypes around autism. I think a lot more awareness needs to be spread about what autism actually is, and how broad of a spectrum it is, and how it differs from everyone. And there's no one fixed thing. Like, I think a lot of people kind of think, oh, autism just means like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory kind of thing. And like, I can't count the amount of time people have told me, you don't look autistic, or you don't like seem autistic. And it's just like, and I just think the thing I'd like to see most is kind of more awareness being spread, and people being more accepting and understanding of like autism. And I just want to get rid of the harmful stereotypes that are around it. And I think
Yeah.
another big thing as well would be adjustments, especially in terms of schools, because I think some schools are better than others. But for example, schools like my old school were absolutely horrendous and made my life hell because of, but so I would like to see like a change in attitude towards autism as a whole and some more adjustments being put in place specifically in the education system.
Yeah. And I think the media has a part to play on that. You see more
Yes.
series and more documentaries on TV these days, but there's still a lack
Yeah.
of media representation.
Mm.
And again, it feels like, so I'm thinking about, and I don't know if you know any of these, but I'm thinking about The Good Doctor, for example. Have you heard about
Yes.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've watched it as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Sean is great, and it has plenty of
Yeah.
autistic traits, but he's the doctor who uses he's very visual and he can
Mm.
solve problems very easily. But that's one example. That's him.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then you have short films in Disney, which are slightly different. And you have, I think, one of them, isn't it called Float? And I think
Yes,
you
I've
have
watched that.
a
Yeah.
nonverbal girl. So
Yes.
you start seeing more and more, but I think
Yeah.
there needs to be more
Yeah.
representation, because that will help. At the end of the day, the media is where most of the people will
Yes.
get
Yeah.
informed. But it's also about being curious. I feel like we are not curious enough.
Yes.
We hear things here and there, and then we storage the knowledge, thinking that that's the only or the absolute truth.
Mm.
But there's a lot more to it. So I
Yeah.
I, I
I
totally
completely
agree with
agree.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, in terms of, let's talk a bit more about you now. Well, we've been talking about you all the time anyway, but yeah,
Okay.
this is the part of my
Yes.
questions where we focus a bit more on you. So, who
Yes.
is your biggest support on your journey?
Um, I'd like to say my dog, because like my dog Otto, he's the love of my life. He's like my boyfriend.
Oh,
He's just the most. Coming home from school, like he's been with me through thick and thin, and he's just always there to listen. Like it's not like a human where you don't know what they're going to say, you don't know how they're going to react. He's just there for you, and I think it's my parents have always said that they can always completely tell that Otto, my dog, is one of my biggest kind of factors that has helped me. But other than my dog, I would like to say 100% my mum and my dad, particularly my mum, because she, after being diagnosed, the amount of time and effort she put into like researching autism, and she's amazing, and I genuinely she's been through so much, but yet she's still always there for me. Same with my dad, and I really look up to them, and I genuinely I wouldn't be at the place I'm at now if it wasn't for my parents.
yeah, that's really, really nice. Yeah, parents make a huge difference, and pets as well. It's
Yes.
good to see that you have that
Yeah.
relationship with Otto. I think I've seen a picture of him,
Yes.
and he's very, very cute.
Yes.
And how do you treat yourself in terms of well-being? So you mentioned earlier you love gaming,
Yeah.
so I guess that helps a lot. But is there anything else that you do that's not
Um.
related with your special interests?
I mean, I was gonna say singing, but I've kind of already
Yeah,
mentioned that.
yeah,
But
but that's
other than singing and listening to music and gaming, I would actually say I'm comfort foods. I think whenever I have a bad day at school, the only thing I want to do is go home and have a chocolate bar. So I think having food that I like is another big way that I kind of treat myself. Um, and you know, I just yeah, I think food is a big part of my life. I'm very, very picky, and I only really like. I'm very particular about what I like, but when I have food that I particularly love, that's what I treat myself with. I'd say.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And who is your biggest inspiration?
I think that's such a hard question, but I probably would say my mum because she's been through so much and she's still every morning up at the crack of dawn, getting my brother to school, doing her work, she's just, I couldn't imagine if I was her, I would have given up years ago. So I think the fact that I see my mum just constantly working hard and like, you know, getting up and
Carrying on.
just carrying on and being resilient, that's a massive inspiration to me. And I think another one of my inspirations, which is a bit random, but I don't know if you've heard of her before. She's called Fern Brady. She's a comedian. She's also autistic, and
Yep.
she's a huge inspiration to me. I remember because my mum showed her to me a few years ago, and she's just so cool because she's autistic, but she diagnosed late. Very similar to me, like very similar journey to me. She's funny, she's pretty, she's successful, so she's a big inspiration to me as well. But my mum is probably the main one, and my dad as well. But I do have to say, I love them both equally. But I do have to say, my mum puts more effort into kind of researching autism and stuff like that. So I'd say she's probably a bit more of an inspiration.
No, that makes total sense. Another comedian. If you could share actually the link of the comedian you just mentioned.
Yeah,
One of my favorite ones is Hannah Gadsby. She's Australian as well. She's
yeah.
autistic. I don't know if you've heard of her, but I would recommend you to
Okay.
have a look. Yeah, she has a couple of episodes on Netflix, and I'm actually going to watch her live
Yeah.
in London in
Oh,
3 weeks, I think.
yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I'll share the link with you as well in the end.
Mm.
And I don't know how much you are into superheroes, but
Yeah.
if you were a superhero or you had a superpower, what would that be? And how would you use it to make the world a better place for neurodivergent people?
Well, I forgot to mention in actually my special interests. I'm a big Marvel nerd,
Okay,
and
that's
my
good.
favorite superhero of all time is Deadpool. He's not really
Uh-huh.
a superhero. He's more of an
In
anti-hero, an
hero.
anti-villain, whatever they call them. But I just love him. I think he's so funny, and he's probably one of my special interests as well. So I think if I could be any superhero, it probably would be Deadpool. But if it was just a superpower in itself, I don't know. I feel like I'd like to harness like the elements. I don't know. It's a bit random, but I feel like I don't know, being able to like control fire, water, air, anything. I feel like that would be quite cool.
Yeah, that sounds very cool. And we share the same interest with Deadpool. I love him as well.
I
He's one
love
of my
Deadpool
favorites.
so much. I've got posters all over my room of him. I've got figurines of him. I love him.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. We have a glass that we got in the cinema when the Deadpool Wolverine came.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah,
that's probably the only thing we have at home. But yeah, I'm a huge fan,
yeah,
massive fan as well. This is season 3 of the Neurodiverse Voices podcast.
yeah.
And what are your hopes for the future?
I want to go to university. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do at university yet, but I'm thinking something along the law or criminology side of things. And I think that comes from I like campaigning for what's right and kind of like justice. I've got a really strong sense of justice, so I think I'd be quite a good lawyer. But yeah, so I want to go to university, and I also just want to travel quite a bit. I want to kind of experience as much as I can experience and travel the world. So I would say that is probably my kind of
That sounds
hopes.
like a really good future.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I also want lots of pets. I want lots of dogs and cats.
That also sounds good.
Yeah,
And Imogen, final question. If your
yeah.
heart had a voice, what would it tell us?
Oh, that's a hard question. Um, I think particularly aimed at all the other young autistic girls out there, I think it'd probably say it's okay, and I just want to give them all like a big hug and tell them that everything will work out and that it's okay and that it'll just everything will fall into place and you don't need to worry and just try and kind of enjoy life how it is at the moment, even if it's difficult. But yeah, I would say probably that. Yeah.
That's very encouraging and very sweet. And yeah, Imogen, it has been an absolute pleasure to
Thank you.
chat with you for the past, I don't know, I'm completely lost with time, hour or so.
Thank
Thank
you. It's been
you.
a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on the podcast.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. And yeah, we'll shall stay in touch, and hopefully you'll come back in a year time or something like that to
Yes, of
share your
course. I'd love
updates.
to.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It has been such a great pleasure to interview Imogen. At a very young age, she has already been through a lot. And although it has been hard, her curiosity to educate herself about autism, her courage and bravery to advocate for herself and for other autistic young girls is utterly admirable. Imogen is the living proof that with the right support and love at home, every autistic young person can thrive. And I would like to take this moment to acknowledge Imogen's parents, especially her mum, who, despite any challenges, is a warrior. No wonder why Imogen says that she's her biggest inspiration. She's also an inspiration of mine. Thank you for our amazing conversation, Imogen. To you, thank you for listening and watching the Neurodiverse Voices podcast. I will see you on that side again on the 1st of February with my incredible guest, Claire Mackay. Claire is a professor of imaging neuroscience at the University of Oxford. She's also the lead of the dementia research theme, part of the Oxford Health Biomedical Research Centre, and she's also the Trick Prof, a project she launched inspired by her own lived experience of trichotillomania, which is a body-focused repetitive behavior. Claire and her team have been researching the links of BFRBs with neurodivergence. So if you want to find out more, do not miss the next episode. Remember to subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. I will see you soon. Bye.